my perspective, the concepts of language ideology and translingualism fit well together. I believe that in the US education context, there needs to be a reconceptualization of language, and that we need to restructure the way in which we teach English to quote unquote non native speakers of English, the way that we identify them through things such as the home language survey, and the way that we go about viewing them. Oftentimes, there's this perception that they have a language deficit, when in reality, if they speak another language, that isn't a deficit at all. And we need to basically dismantle these notions of first language speaker, non-native speaker. We need to dismantle those identities, because it creates this unhealthy binary between people, when in reality, from a translingual perspective, everyone is meshing languages together, because all languages have been in contact. Most languages have been in contact with each other. Languages are constantly evolving. People use an array of linguistic repertoires when they're speaking. Therefore, there is no real need to identify one person as one thing and one person as another thing. Additionally, these identities in non-native speaker, native speaker, are not fixed. They're not static. People change throughout time. People's language abilities change without time. And we need to recognize that. In the US, because we view knowing a different language other than English as a language deficit, as an academic issue, students are labeled and identified as like just one thing. It's fixed, it's stapled on to their transcript and kind of like plastered on their forehead. And that's highly problematic, because they can grow, and they won't be the same person they were in third grade when in comparison to when they're in seventh grade. And so, and the language they use, the way they speak, is not going to be the same either. And so we need to reconceptualize how all these things are working. And that's how I see translingualism and language ideologies coming together. From a translingual perspective, additionally, we need to allow students to use all of their linguistic resources when it comes to classroom instruction. Using heritage languages is not a bad thing. Students will be able to express themselves and tap into knowledge that they have. And this is very, very important, because students need to be able to fully express themselves and see themselves in the classroom in order to engage with the content that they're teaching. And I hope that by working in educational policies in the future, I'll be able to push for a new way in which we just deal with multilingual people here in the US. Additionally, in regards to ESL in the US, we need to recognize that the English that is used in the United States is, number one, not homogenous. It's very heterogeneous. The English that people speak from the state of Florida is different from the English that people speak from the state of New York and California and Ohio. And we need to recognize that there are so many different ways in which people speak, and it's okay to speak these different ways, and that people in each state may speak standard English, quote unquote standard English, but they're all bringing their own little twist to it. And so therefore there is no real standard English. And that would then dismantle this whole idea of that everyone has to speak the same way. We need to recognize that our students who are coming from countries where English is used as a lingua franca, or as a first language, that they also know English. And the article that Jane 2014 talks about how she brought in students' translingual identities into the classroom when teaching. For instance, when teaching certain vocabularies, such as, for example, elevator or lift, allowing students to explore the fact that in different countries, different this different lexicon is used, and that's okay. And we don't need to teach students we don't need to teach students that there's only one way of saying it, but we need to help them make connections with the things they already know so that they're more powerful communicators. We also need to help students become more competent in using different repertoires in different situations, allowing them to know when it's okay to speak a certain way, when they need to use different language in different contexts. Being able to teach students how to use different repertoires will make them stronger writers, stronger speakers, and more culturally competent as well. And that's something that we really need to be pushing for here in the U.S. education system. And that's how I see these two things being combined together. From a translingual orientation, we can reconceptualize how we look at language in general, and that just basically shifts these language ideologies that kind of place people into boxes and that believe that there's only one way of speaking, or that you need a certain way to speak in order to be academically successful. And so, yes, that's how I see all of these things combined together. And I believe there's a lot more for me to learn and explore in these topics and concepts. And I look forward to doing that in the future. But as I continue my studies in this program and go on to a PhD and go on to work in education policy and possibly curriculum construction and work with nonprofit organizations that empower immigrant and refugee communities here in the US. I hope to bring these concepts together. I hope that in the future, teachers who are teaching at regular schools will be aware of these concepts so that they are not hurting their students. And all of these videos that I've shown, teachers' language ideologies really affect students' academic success and academic trajectories. And so I hope that there can be change in teacher training, pre-service teacher training, and teacher education. And so that these things that we know about in linguistics are just not staying within linguistics, but they're also being used out in the regular world. And so, yes, that's how I see all of these things connected. And I hope to continue to learn more about them and use them in my everyday life and use them in my classrooms going on in the future and in my research.